Hello and welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. I want to make sure that everybody's audio preferences get settled before we begin. That looks like a pretty good critical mass, and I'll make sure that I type this out for people that are joining us a little bit later, but welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few technical details so that we're all on the same page. As you probably noticed, we're using Zoom Webinar, which is very similar to Zoom Meeting, with one key or two key exceptions, I suppose, is that your microphones are disabled and your cameras are disabled. So the primary way to interact is using the chat and the Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen. For chat, you can use that for comments or discussion. Just make sure that if you want everyone to see your message, that you select everyone from the drop down there. And then we prefer that you ask questions using the Q&A panel. You can ask those anonymously, and you can view existing questions as well as add your own comments and even like them if you want to. You can ask those questions at any time, and we will get to them at the end of the session. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to our moderator for the day, Anita. Anita?
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Nunez Chapelato. I'm the Director of Corporate Partnerships for ACRO, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining. Thank you to Vision Point Marketing for hosting today's webinar on the enrollment growth pivot as they share perspectives on admissions marketing and recruitment efforts. Vision Point is an integrated marketing agency that helps institutions of higher education meet their admissions, branding, communications goals, and I've had the pleasure of working with them when they joined ACRO as a new corporate partner. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speaker today, Josh Dodson. Josh?
Great, thank you both. I hope everyone's doing well today. I'm thrilled to be with you all and look forward to some discussion here in a bit. But first of all, I'd like to just take a second to introduce myself and kind of share a little bit more about my background. My name is Josh Dodson. I'm the Vice President of Innovation at Vision Point. I've been at Vision Point for about 5 years almost, but worked in higher ed in different both agencies as well as universities for a little over 15 years. So definitely a strong commitment to higher ed and the mission of serving especially individuals, first generations and students, and really excited to see ways that we can help institutions reach more of those first generation students, and not just first gen, but all kinds of students. That just happens to be one segment that I've worked with. So prior to joining Vision Point, I was over web and digital marketing for Bentley University. And prior to that, I was the AVP of digital marketing for Southern New Hampshire University, SNHU, the big primarily online school in New Hampshire. And some of what I'm hoping to share today is actually going to be a little bit from the SNHU playbook. So it's some of the tactics that we took to make sure that we were able to really make the best decisions and pivot where necessary to make sure that we were able to meet our goals and grow enrollment and reach as many people as we possibly could with our mission. So I'm going to spend a fair bit of time talking about this really from an enrollment marketing perspective. And one of the things that I hope everyone will be able to see through this presentation is the relationship between marketing and enrollment management that I'll say at a lot of institutions, there isn't much of a relationship there, but it's really important. In fact, I would say it's vital for the success of recruitment and efforts going forward. So one of the things that I want to start with is recently our team at Vision Point, we did some team building exercises, and part of that was to work through this Mount Everest challenge, where we were working together to answer some questions and kind of figure out the best way forward, kind of from base camp all the way through the various camps and then to the summit. The objective was to, of course, reach the summit, but there are a lot of things, a lot of considerations along the way. The Khumbu Icefall, for example, I mean, that's considered one of the most treacherous places to climb in the entire world. Things like going from, Camp 4 up to the summit is, even though it looks like the distance might not be that far, it really is a treacherous path. And as I'm sure many of you know, when it comes to Everest, it's something that a lot of people, some people work a good part of their life towards achieving this and summiting, but we also know that a lot of people have not made it. They've died or have just not simply been able to make it to the summit. And so as we were working through this exercise, I thought that this was actually a really interesting, relevant way to look at some of the efforts when it comes to recruitment and making sure that we're able to see specific movement towards enrollment growth goals. And so what does that look like if we were to kind of layer on top of this Everest example, if we were to layer on top of it these steps that are required and the components and those different pieces? And the first thing, if you look at the very bottom, is, we have to catch their attention, right? That's crucial. We have to catch the attention of the prospective student, regardless of whether that's in-person events, online marketing, social media, ads or organic methods. Really catching their attention is so important, because without doing that, you're not able to even start the conversation. And so that's really the first and kind of most important first step. And then there's the www.edu website. I mean, I'm sure that all of you are probably in love with your websites, and I hope that it's functioning exactly as you want. But many institutions' websites are not the easiest to navigate. So as we're trying to encourage prospective students to find their way through the website to get the information that they need to reach out and ultimately become a lead, that's an important step. Obviously, we're trying to convert more prospective students into raising their hands. And I'm using the term lead here in a few kind of more marketing centric terms. I mean, you can replace this with the terms that your institution might use: prospect, suspect, and so forth. But as we think of it, someone really just raising their hand, wanting to learn more, wanting to engage and find out some more information, just becoming a lead. That's simply giving you their information and giving you permission to talk with them. They want to start that conversation. If they've entered their information. Of course, there's also list buying tactics and ways that you can purchase names. That's also obviously very important. And even those, that once they come into the system, they still follow the same path in many ways. You need to then go from that point of being in the system to engaging with that individual. You're wanting to make sure that they're looking at emails and things like that. They're engaging with you, getting them to then apply. That is so important, and frankly, not necessarily easy to get them from lead to application. I'm sure many of you are already well aware of that. Once they've applied, getting them to deposit if they've been admitted. And then there's the extremely treacherous aspect of from that kind of point between deposit all the way through to matriculation, actually showing up and enrolling in those classes and taking taking those steps to be an actual student, not just someone who's applied. There's a lot.
Sorry to interrupt you there. If you meant to share your slides, we don't see them right now.
Oh, you don't? Oh, I apologize for that. Give me one moment. I will make sure to share them.
I'm sorry, I would have jumped in earlier. I wasn't sure until you referenced something, I think, on the page.
Yes.
Yep, there we go. All right, thank you.
Thank you for letting me know. So I apologize for that. This was the example from Mount Everest, the example going from the base camp all the way through to the summit of Mount Everest. But again, sort of taking this example and laying over it some of the more recruitment focused and especially enrollment marketing focused steps along the way. We might see something more like this that I just talked through. So I won't go through it all again at the moment. But we are all probably pretty familiar, generally speaking, with these steps, or at least these kinds of steps. And, as we're moving it forward, there are certain metrics that we need to look at to make sure that each of these steps are really playing their role, that they're doing what they're intended to do. And these are great metrics. And there's some metrics here I'm going to quickly go over that probably most of you might be familiar with, but there's also some metrics that I'm fairly certain most of you are not familiar with. One in particular that we'll be digging into in a bit. So as we're thinking about catching their attention, we start to look at metrics like users, sessions, and clicks, right? Those are the people who come to the website. What's the web analytics data telling us? How many users are there, and how many people clicked on any kinds of ads that they may have seen to get to the website, get to the landing page, for example. Similarly, the www.edu site, so many metrics in terms of web analytics metrics. You can see tons of information, how much time people are spending on particular pages, and what they're doing on those pages, how long their sessions are, how many pages they're looking at, all kinds of fantastic information like that. So tons of metrics are available there. All of them are useful for particular tasks and to get specific information. But that can be kind of overwhelming sometimes, just with the number of metrics that are there. Next, when we start to think about lead and kind of just bringing those individuals into the system, we start to look at metrics like conversions, or inquiries is another term for it that we'll often use in this industry. Someone requesting more information, inquiring to learn more. We start to look at conversion rates. How many people come to the website and then actually submit that request for information form to learn more and start that conversation, or how many people engage with chat or send an email. Any number of conversions can be measured in that way. And then CPA or CPL, cost per action or cost per lead. This starts to get to a really important consideration, because we're starting to actually look at the amount of money that we're spending on these different tactics, these different channels, and how much it costs across each of the different methods and sources that you're using to get someone's information, basically to get them to click on an ad perhaps, or to engage with a social post. How much does it cost the institution to get someone to engage and provide their information to start that conversation? That's a great metric that you can use. If you're not using that already, it's a great one that you can immediately start with using, looking at the cost per lead by channel. Because if you're finding that certain channels are working really well, in terms of low dollar cost per lead, but other channels are really expensive, those are some key inputs that you can use to figure out, is this really performing like we want it to? Engage. I won't even go into all of the many CRM metrics, but looking at things like open rates and how many people are actually opening the emails and engaging with them and taking action, maybe clicking on links even within those emails and so forth. We have CRM experts at Vision Point who know a whole lot more about those CRM metrics and can rattle a long list of them. And so it's obviously important that once someone is in the system, we want to engage with them. Of course, with the application, we want to see how many people are starting applications and how many people are completing applications. We've worked with clients in the past where We've seen tons of started applications, but for whatever reason, not a lot of them were getting completed. Very low percentages of applications were being completed. And so that gives us a chance to look in there and kind of identify where is the issue. Sometimes the issue is with the actual form itself, with the application form. Sometimes there are issues, just getting people information. Maybe you're waiting on just a little bit more information, maybe a document to come through or something like that. What kinds of steps are you already thinking about as you're looking at these metrics to intervene and maybe help some of those people who started the applications to finish it? So that's of course an important metric. And then of course, once someone has been accepted, have they submitted their deposit or taken some kind of action to indicate that they're serious? But we've been talking with a lot of institutions lately that have told us that even when some individuals have submitted their deposit, oftentimes they're seeing lower numbers showing up on the first day of class. And so that's a consideration, making sure that yield is there and you're taking those efforts that you can take to improve the yield and start to think about that. And finally, matriculation, looking at the enrollments, pure raw numbers of enrollments, comparing things like year over year. Are you seeing improvements? Are you seeing growth? Maybe not raw numbers even, but specific enrollments from specific segments of people that you've targeted over the past year. And then probably I would say one of the most important metrics that you can use that I would imagine you're probably not using today is cost per enrolled student. Okay, this one metric will completely change the way that you think about recruiting students and how you're thinking about using your resources, specifically your marketing dollars, but not just what you think of as marketing. This can go into events. This can include different activities where you might be going and talking with people and getting their names and starting those conversations, making sure that you're tracking that. You're able to see the impact of each of those different lead sources on enrollments. And if you're finding, sometimes you might find that you're seeing really good results from a particular source in terms of leads. You're getting a ton of names maybe from Google or from Facebook, but maybe they're not turning into enrolled students. And most institutions that we talk to are not tracking this before they work with us. And when you're able to start tracking that, you have to connect some systems. There's a little bit of back-end work. It's not nearly as complicated as people tend to think it is. But once those systems are connected and you can start to see the downstream effort, kind of the downstream impact and how many of these individuals, that came in through a particular channel became actual enrolled students, it completely changes the way that you're able to think about your approach, completely changes the way that you're able to allocate money and even do some forecasting. We're going to get into all of that in a minute. But this is really, this is the key thrust of really my presentation today, is to start thinking deeper into the funnel or rather start connecting actions that happen earlier in the funnel to outcomes that happen deeper so that you can make better decisions earlier on. That I would say is one of the biggest reasons. The ability to see that is one of the biggest reasons why at SNHU we were able to very quickly pivot and make changes to our marketing and recruitment efforts. So that way, if we see that something's not working, stop wasting money there, pivot it, shift it to something else, and optimize it, get even more return on the channels that are working well. One of the things that tends to be a challenge with a lot of institutions that we work with as well is often, for marketing, they feel like, well, they're just taking these leads that are coming in and they're kind of throwing them over the fence, if you will, and hoping for the best, that they're followed up with, and they go through the traditional communication sequences and everything through the CRM. But really, there's no guarantee. And one of the key things that must happen for this to be successful is that marketing, is that the marketers and the folks in enrollment management. I think that probably most of the people on the webinar today are within enrollment management, but that relationship between marketing and enrollment management is not something that needs to be, kind of transactional. It's something that when it's working together, when both groups are working together, you're able to do much more strategic things earlier on, and even do a better job of sometimes shaping the class by targeting some of the right people earlier. And it becomes a much stronger process when admissions and marketing are able to collaborate more. And what can this look like? There's a lot of pieces to this, and I want to dig into some specific examples because I think it really is so important to look at this full funnel and make sure that we're clear on what actually happens from that very first point of contact through enrollment. And so, as you're thinking about different ways to drive people to your website, you can drive them or draw them. If you look at the far left example, driving them with paid advertising, and that could include a number of different things. It could include billboards. It can include radio spots. It can include digital ads. It can include lots of different paid methods of sending people to the website, kind of initiating that interest and getting them to go to the website, drawing them in with really strong organic content that answers their questions. And that's really the key with that, is that the organic content needs to be able to answer the questions that the prospects have, and do so in a way that is aligned with what they're looking for. And so, for example, at Vision Point, we'll work with some clients doing some keyword research, looking at SEO factors and keywords that we can use, working that into the content, not just to include keywords, kind of sprinkle keywords all throughout the page, but rather using that research to see literally what are people asking. And you'd be surprised probably at how many people will ask an actual question in their phones or type it in. Some of you may be old enough to remember Ask Jeeves, the older search engine where you were intended to type a question. It's still kind of like that with Google for a lot of people. They ask Google a lot of questions, and so being able to create organic content that draws them in with that can be extremely useful. When they get to the website, making sure that they have a really strong optimized experience. They're getting the information that they're looking for. They're getting that, able to find the programs that they're interested in. They're, if it's a paid ad that brings them there, that landing page really created in such a way that gives that prospect every opportunity to submit their information via an inquiry form and start that conversation. The intention of the landing pages and frankly, even a lot of the program pages should not be to give just every single piece of information possible, but rather to give enough information to interest that individual in starting a conversation, where then the team can then maybe get on a call or an email and share even more information and engage with that individual. Depending on whether that individual filled out an inquiry form and initiated that conversation earlier on, if they didn't convert with that inquiry form, doing some additional advertising to send them back to other, not the exact same pages that already didn't convert them, but targeted content on pages that were really built with the purpose of conversions in mind. And if they have converted and filled out that initial form, making sure that you're continuing to do the things that you can, engaging that individual, making sure that they recognize that they're fully aware of those next steps. And that's where something, for example, I have on this slide here, admitted yield microsite. That's something that not a lot of folks utilize, where you're providing information. What are those next steps even after an application has been submitted? What someone's admitted to the school, maybe they receive a letter, an email, maybe some instructions, but that's easy to get lost. If you're able to create something like an admitted yield microsite where they're able to customize sort of their path, looking for those resources that are most important to them, and able to kind of see those next steps. Did they apply for that scholarship? Did they submit their information, with different stages of the process, and kind of guiding them along the way, making it as easy as possible, because really the purpose of this entire journey, or our intention, is to remove the obstacles. We don't want to make it hard for people. It's already hard enough. There's a lot of information that they have to provide, a lot of things that they're trying to do to kind of stay organized. And let's not even get started on all of the pandemic stress and things like that. But removing obstacles and making it as easy as possible for them to know what that next step is. And then along the way, watching and kind of seeing, what does this path look like? Are we using the right types of analytics and dashboards? Are we creating the right reports to make sure that we have a really strong understanding? And using things like predictive and prescriptive analytics can be really helpful for that. I'll dig into that more in a minute, but looking at how many students am I expecting right now based off of how many individuals I have in my database. Using predictive models to look at that versus what your current plan is, compare it against one another, and actually use prescriptive models to make recommendations for where you can change things. Using the same budget, you don't even have to look for more money. Use the money you've already got, but use the analytics to help inform where you might where you might need to be spending those resources most effectively. And so this is where we're kind of looking at that full funnel. We're all thinking about getting their attention, getting them with the information that they need, and getting them all the way through to that point, to the summit of matriculation. And there are just so many steps along the way. Marketers are often very guilty, and I'll be the first to admit this, of saying that since marketing is able to produce leads, like there are some that's reason to rejoice. And frankly, it's great that we're getting those leads in. It's great that we're getting those names in the database. But if they're not turning into students, that's not a good thing. We want to make sure that we're taking those leads, that they're qualified, and that if we needed to make a change earlier on, and maybe the type of campaign that's running, or a different approach, you can learn that as early as possible, so that you can shift gears. And I do just want to say that very often, in terms of leads, we're seeing a lot of institutions that we're just knocking it out of the park, getting tons of leads, and even some case getting the applications. Some schools that I've talked with recently, though, have said, we've seen some increases here, but in terms of people actually showing up to class, they're not actually showing up. We're seeing the leads, we're seeing the applications, they're accepting after they've been admitted. They've deposited even, and they're just not showing up for class. And so again, even though you might be knocking it out of the park at certain stages, if those stages and the teams aren't working together to make sure that everything is focused in the right direction, and you're able to change the levers that will be most effective, it's not as useful as it can be. So big focus here on making sure that everyone is looking to the top, everyone is looking to the summit, because if we're not all on the same page and thinking about that all the way from marketing through the point of enrollment, it's just not going to work as well as it could. And frankly, a lot of the bigger schools like SNHU, as I mentioned, where I served as AVP of digital marketing, we were able to do a lot of really amazing things, but that's only because marketing and enrollment management, the admissions team, the recruiters, we were all working very closely together, looking in the same direction and looking at the right metrics to make sure that we're making those decisions. So what does that look like? We've kind of talked through the approach and some of the ideas, but like if we were to actually look at a report that might provide some of this information, what would that report look like? And well, here's an example of one that I think is pretty useful, a good example of a report that displays the kind of information that I believe can be extremely relevant to both marketers, people in the marketing side, as well as enrollment management personnel, because as you can see, we're looking at different factors, billboards and, being display ads, search, broadcast TV, cable TV, events, even, those, think about the college fairs, think about different on-campus events that might be happening. And when I say college fairs too, even if there are things that are virtual happening, in this case, they're tagged as events, but you can even separate those out and start to see specifically, this event or this type of event, and start to measure that out. And so once you're able to see all of those different channels, those different sources where you're getting those leads and that information, kind of the request for information coming in, you can see the channel and then the number of inquiries that are coming in, which allow you to measure or to kind of see the metric of the cost per inquiry. Again, that's great. Right away, you're able to start seeing some useful information. For example, if you're seeing programmatic is, $1,200 per lead, but cable TV is only 90, and these are fictional numbers, by the way. So please don't use this as as if I were telling you to update your specific plan this way, but rather use your own data for that. In this example, though, if programmatic advertising is $1,200, but cable TV is $90, then you might start to think, well, I just need to do a lot more cable TV and I can get rid of programmatic. But wait, let's keep going, because that is by itself not the full picture, and you would make the wrong decision if you were to do that. And so here's what I mean. So let's keep going. We'll look at the applications here. So you can see specifically all of these different channels and the number of applications that are coming in as a direct result of those channels. And so as you're looking at cost per application, you can see different numbers there, very similar to the cost per inquiry. But really, the most important piece of all of this is looking at enrollments and cost per enrolled student by channel, because that is really the measure where you can see the downstream impact. You can see what actually happens in terms of real outcomes, real measurable outcomes for the university, so that you can tie those to that actual revenue, tuition dollars. So things looking at these examples here, radio, for example, at the very bottom, where it looked really strong in terms of cost per inquiry, is actually a very expensive channel when you're looking at cost per enrolled student. It goes from $750 to over $3,000, right? So that's very different. Being search here, $261 for cost per inquiry, that jumps up to over $3,000 cost per enrolled student with this example here. But you might find some other cases where you're seeing some examples where the cost per enrolled student is actually a lot better than you might have expected. Maybe Google Display is working a lot better than you would have anticipated, and making sure that you're able to make the right decision based off of the data and not just how kind of the early results feel is really, really important. And so one of the key pieces with all of this, and this is something that really requires internal collaboration and making sure that you all are able to have good connections with other other departments on campus and in terms of sharing information. Very often you have to talk to the finance department, but understanding, what is the value, what is the lifetime value of a student in terms of revenue coming into the institution. If you're able to get that number, and we work with institutions sometimes looking at that number and it kind of settling on, well, we're gonna use this as our average lifetime value. Once you're able to get that information, you can now have a threshold, because you obviously, if you have a lifetime value of let's say $10,000 for a student, you don't want to spend $10,000 to recruit that student. You want to make sure that you're below that threshold, and really significantly below the threshold. You want to spend as little as you can, because you're able to then be a good steward of the institution's resources by spending less money to recruit more and better students. So it is helpful to have that lifetime value. If you don't have that lifetime value determined by working with other departments on campus, as I mentioned, the finance department is usually really helpful in determining that. You can at least use this as a way to compare against channel to channel and make sure that, well, I can see for sure that it costs a lot less to get an enrolled student if I'm using this channel as compared to that channel. This, once that is in place, once you're able to start measuring those, measuring that data and kind of following it all the way through, you can then start doing some exciting things like media mix modeling. This is an example from one of our dashboards where using the exact same total budget, but changing the allocation of that budget across different channels, we were able to see an increase of 16 additional projected students. And so again, that's using the same exact budget. It's just optimizing that budget so that you're able to make the best possible use of it. Very, very often it's making small changes, shifting a little bit from one to another. Sometimes, I will say politics does come into play. And you might have to, for whatever reason, run a billboard on a particular route, maybe that a trustee member drives or a faculty member drives. Maybe they like listening to a particular radio station and they want to hear that, on the radio station. And I will say that is a reality of working in higher ed. And sometimes we know that a particular channel is not necessarily the best one, but there's internal pressures for using it. That's okay. Using this type of approach, we're able to even control for that and make sure that we're considering, like, we have to be in this channel. We have to spend at least this much here with these billboards, for example, but we have some flexibility if we shift things around in other ways. So you can start to try out some different models and see what those projections can look like. Try it out, test it, see what those outcomes are, and you're able to then use the data, those outcomes, to update, improve, optimize the model for the next season, and so forth. And so I highly recommend it, both this table and or this example in the table from the last slide I showed with cost per enrolled student. These come out of a dashboard that VisionPoint has, and one of our tools that is called Enrollment Drive Analyze, and that provides enrollment forecasting for overall number of students expected, as well as students by different subgroup. It does this sort of media mix modeling so that you can have a better idea about which marketing channels are contributing in the best way with the lowest amount of money from cost per enrolled student, but also what would happen if I shift things around a bit. So those are all those are just examples from ours. As I mentioned, though, some institutions like SNHU have set up their own already, and that this is a common trait among the institutions that have seen growth in the past couple of years. is that these are the types of metrics that they're looking at. They're not just looking lower funnel metrics, total number of leads, total number of conversations, things like that. Those are useful, but that's not all of it. You need to look much deeper to be more effective. You need to make sure that everyone's looking up to the same summit point, and everyone's able to have the same goals and work towards those goals. So that's really that's the main thrust that I wanted to convey today is the importance of looking deeper, and the importance of different departments, marketing and admissions, working together, collaborating on this, figuring out ways that they can connect those dots in terms of the data, finding ways that they can work together to make better changes earlier on, to see better outcomes down the road. So thank you so much for joining today. I hope that this has been informative, and we do have time if there are any questions.
Hi, Josh. This is a question. Kim Smith said in the cable versus programmatic example, both had the same CPES. So isn't it better to put more marketing dollars into cable and less into programmatic?
That's a good question. And I'm going to pull up I would say that it depends. The example that I had here is with programmatic, and I think that it is a good point, because if you are bringing in a lot more inquiries, for example, from cable TV than you are from programmatic, then and they have the same cost per enrolled student, you now have two metrics that you can use to make that decision, right? You have the cost per enrolled student, which you said, as you point out, all things are equal. So, you can kind of ignore that for a moment, and then look at cost per inquiry, and whichever has the lower cost per inquiry. To your point, you're getting more people aware of your institution, starting that conversation. And if it leads to the same ultimate outcome with cost per enrolled student, then I would say it's a win. You might choose not to get rid of one or the other. You might choose to keep both, and kind of experiment with budget, maybe shift a little more into cable.
Thanks, Josh. That's the only question we have right now. So if anyone has questions, please place those questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. I think everyone's extra shy today.
That's all right. This, I would say that, for a lot of institutions that we speak with and we share this information with, it's something that a lot of schools are like, yes, that absolutely makes sense. Why weren't we doing this before? Why weren't we connecting those dots? And I just want to emphasize that it's frankly a lot easier to do than you might realize. And we'd be happy to have any conversations, any follow up if there are questions afterwards as well.
Sorry, it looks like we have another question or comment. When marketing buys are not centralized, such as major marketing in one area, targeted marketing by another area, event marketing by multiple departments with each buying their own marketing giveaways, average cost have too many variables. It seems that it would be better to centralize some of these first for economies of scale than measure cost per student.
That's a great point. What is it? And so to speak to that, I would say that at the very least, even if it's not completely centralized, I would recommend that they be coordinated as much as possible. By which I mean, perhaps let's say you have a business school and you have central marketing, and the business school, they do their own marketing and their own kind of key initiatives. and then central marketing does theirs. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to centralize and become one and the same, kind of part of the same group. You can still keep them separate, but communicating as much as possible what the plans are, what's happening, and just to make sure that there's visibility. We're huge fans of transparency. Transparency and data is really crucial for success. And if you're able to share that information, it becomes a lot easier, where you can understand, okay, this group over here, they're spending X number of dollars in Google, ads. And over here, we're spending this, and this is ultimately what we're seeing. One consideration too is that a system like the one I described, where you're able to see all the way through the funnel, it can actually account for it can account for different system or different departments doing things a little bit differently, as long as they're all connected in a common way. So there are ways to do that. It can be helpful to have it centralized, but you absolutely can be successful still with an uncentralized model, or a decentralized model, as long as there's clear communication.
Thank you, Josh. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. The first one is, any tips on connecting Google Ads to Target X parentheses Salesforce?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Any tips on connecting Google Ads to Target X parentheses Salesforce? Yes, definitely have some recommendations for that. So in terms of connecting, really, there are some standard industry ways to measure the performance of ads, kind of generally speaking. And some systems like Target X, Salesforce, other systems will occasionally have the ability to add tracking automatically to various links. For example, if you're creating links from an email campaign or even an ad or something like that, you're able to see how many clicks happen and kind of take a user to a particular page. It has to do with the URL tracking mechanism. They're called UTM parameters. That's one way to do it. But probably an even more useful way to do it is to make sure that there's just that the source information, once an individual comes to your website and submits a form, that source information is somehow passed into a CRM. So whether that's Slate, Salesforce, you name it, regardless of what system you're using, you can either, sometimes they'll have an automatic way. For example, Slate automatically can interpret where someone came from. If they came from an ad, or if they came from some other channel, they can interpret that automatically. If your system can't interpret it automatically, you can still build some JavaScript to collect that and then put that into a hidden form field. So there are some ways to do it like that, and I'd be happy to talk further about your specific situation if you have any more questions on that. Josh, related to the earlier question above, Kim Smith says they're using UTMs and are trying to pass the GCLID to Salesforce.
Yes, that is a way that you can do it, passing the GCLID to Salesforce. You don't necessarily have to do it that way. You can even, if for example, you have UTM underscore source equals, Google Ads, or however you have it set up, even just kind of capturing that variable from the URL string and then passing that into the system, you can do it that way too. But I think probably an underlying point there from Kim, and I appreciate the point on the GCLID, is that you need to have that ID somehow to match it back. We have some ways that we do that at VisionPoint with our system Enrollment Drive, but having at least some kind of ID, whether regardless of which method you're using to connect those dots, is definitely an important thing to do.
Thanks, Josh. What is a contact for you in case people want to communicate directly to you?
Yes, that's a great question. You can email me, jdodson@visionpointmarketing.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can feel free to look me up. I'd be happy to connect with all of you, and love the discussion, and kind of would love to continue the discussion on social as well.
Great. It looks like we have one last question. Oh, it doesn't have to be the last. We still have 10 minutes. But how can you measure from channels that don't connect to your CRM, for example, billboards, other than survey or asking the lead directly?
That's a great question. The short answer is we use various predictive models that can do that based off of additional data. For example, modeling spend data, how kind of how much you're spending on specific channels, and then looking at the number of leads that are coming in, as well as perhaps some other data points from your CRM. We'll pull all of these data points into a model, and we use various algorithms that can actually attribute to specific channels where a lead came from, even without that direct attribution that I was talking about earlier with the UTM parameters. So we actually we use a combination of both the direct attribution as well as the predictive model to kind of fill in those gaps.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. Oh, one just popped up. Do you have a baseline benchmark for conversations based on specific channels?
So the question is benchmark for conversions based on the
I'm
channels.
sorry, for conversions.
I think I knew what you meant. So, we do have some benchmarks that we use internally at VisionPoint. For example, we have certain cost per inquiry thresholds that we look towards. For example, if we're seeing a channel, that's consistently coming in at $500 per lead, unless every single one of those leads turns into an enrolled student, we're probably not going to use that to continue using that channel. And so I hate to say that it really depends on your situation, because every school is a little bit different. And the very best thing to do is to use your own data as a benchmark. So start to see, what does it look like today? And then what does it look like over time while you're optimizing it? And how do your channels compare against one another? So if you're able to look at your own kind of natural performance, you can immediately start making recommendations. I recommend starting there rather than looking at even industry benchmarks, because the industry benchmarks can really be misleading. We can definitely dig in a little bit more, but I would definitely recommend using your own data to benchmark that. And of course, one of the most important things you can do is to work with whoever it may be, your finance department or another department on campus, and really figuring out what your lifetime student value is, because that ultimately is the number you absolutely cannot go over before the institution starts losing money. And so those are all great considerations. But yeah, using your own data and looking at the lifetime student value is the way I would recommend going. My pleasure. Are there any other questions?
Well, that looks like we've gotten through most of them, or all of them. I shouldn't say most of them. There are none remaining. I wanted to thank you, Josh, for talking about the product and the service you guys have. It sounds really helpful. And also wanted to mention, for those of you that are looking at VisionPoint or other solution providers, that our annual meeting is coming up at the end of March. So our first in-person annual meeting since 2019. So we're pretty excited about that one. Also want to thank Anita for moderating today, and obviously I want to thank all of you for attending. This recording will be available about 30 minutes after we wrap up. You can use the same link you used for the live session to watch the recording. That will include an audio transcript. And then if you'll be followed up by Vision Point if you want to reference the slide materials as well. All right, so thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.